It's a daunting challenge for any biographer, because he had such a huge range of interests and such an active and varied life. There are bits in it for all sorts of enthusiasms. If you're interested in powerboats, there is a chapter about his marine activities. If you're interested in motorcycles, well, he was a consultant to Triumph in his retirement, and there's quite a lot about that. Obviously, if you want to know about motorsport, there's plenty of that. DFV had an enormous effect on the sport that it powered, to the point where you could argue it laid the foundations of the sport that we have today. And anybody could buy it, and the company had a strict rule that they weren't going to build special engines for anybody, so it was a completely level playing field. And if you won a race with a Cosworth engine and another guy came last, well, he couldn't turn to the power unit. He was doing something wrong with his aerodynamics, or maybe his driver wasn't up to scratch, or whatever. And that opened up the sport to all sorts of teams who otherwise wouldn't have got a look in. If you're interested in the Escort Cosworth and Sierra Cosworth era, there's a chapter involved on that. And all the road car engines, which were also developed by the company, they're covered in a reasonable amount of detail. This book is vastly longer than I ever intended it to be, because so much priceless material kept pouring out of people as I got deeper and deeper into it. The company itself took its cue from him and his personality. The whole drive and ethos of the place came from the top, and it was a very happy place to work. His employees have very fond memories of it, and the way they responded to my inquiries when I started writing the book is evidence of that. People who hadn't been near the place for 30 years, some of them, would be on the phone within an hour of hearing that a question was being asked of them. When you meet that kind of response, you know you're dealing with somebody special. And he got his satisfaction really from the people around him. He was famous for his pithy comments, some of which were just off-the-cuff things said on the spur of the moment on one occasion, but a lot of them came out time and time again, to the point where his friends and his colleagues often could quote you them by heart. And in fact, one of his best-known ones was at one stage even written on the label that was attached to every DFV, inviting the mechanics to record usage details, and number of hours that the engine had run and so on. And it actually said, it is better, I think I've got it here in the book. Here we are. It is better to be uninformed than ill-informed. He often quoted that one. And the other one, which I think is very well known, is it is better to be quiet and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. And if anyone put their foot in it, they were liable to get that spoken back at them. He was famously blunt, and he could get to the point where he was just downright rude on occasions, particularly if someone was pompous or vacuous or know-alls who knew nothing. They were definitely there for the treatment, you know. But these are all characteristics that endeared him to those who worked with him and knew him well. And it just made him somebody very different. He had the supreme self-confidence of being able to just make these statements, and he knew people weren't going to argue with them because he was who he was, and he'd been proved right so many times in what he'd done. And one of his colleagues, Bob Graves, who was the director of the firm for many years, said to me, I think he's the closest thing that Britain produced to a 20th century Brunel. And I think that's fair comment, because his interests were extremely diverse. People know him through motorsport, but he did a lot of other things as well. And it's the other things which are included in this book and haven't really been covered in other publications. I did actually approach him back in the 1990s about the idea, but indirectly through a third party at an aviation company that I had contacts at. And there didn't seem to be any interest at the time, so as I was full of other things, and the idea just went on the back burner. And after he died, I thought, well, maybe now's the time to bring the idea out again. And fortunately, I knew one or two people who knew his widow, and things went on from there. There's an enormous number of people I'd like to thank, and there's a list of everybody involved within the front of the book, and it's over 100 names. Obviously, the most important single name is Keith's widow, Jill, without whom we really couldn't have got the book to this stage. It would have been possible to write a biography, but it wouldn't have been anything like as complete or as accurate. So yes, she's stuck to what at times was a difficult task for her, and I'm grateful to her for that. And so if we can say that publicly, that's great. I think she deserves that. But there's lots and lots of other people who have made an absolutely invaluable contribution. This certainly isn't a solo effort. I hope that it strikes a good balance between being technically interesting and not overwhelming for those who aren't trained engineers. So it shouldn't be daunting for anybody. I think that's the first thing to say, and I hope also it won't feel patronising for those who are really very well versed in these things. And that's the balance which I've tried to strike, and I think I've got it about right, but time will tell.